Yeah, so I reached out to Anna originally. I've known her for a while, and even though it's mostly been in like a friend capacity, I've been very aware that she has this incredible ability to hold just like 20 thoughts and 20 skills in her head at once and just throw whatever is the most applicable detail at the problem. Um, I think that a lot of designers do it, but she's just uniquely like comfortable in that space. And so mostly I'm excited to chat with her today because I think more designers would benefit from being a little bit more light on their toes and creative about the way we dance around between disciplines and disciplines that aren't even design, right? That are like economics and urban planning and like things that are adjacent and will make us deeper thinkers.
Right.
And what amazed me about her is that she talks about such important issues like equality, building homes in Philippines, in other less developed countries, making sure everyone gets the same slice of a cake. But actually, she makes it super interesting and she's so passionate. I think even if the topic is serious, like more sustainability, think before you make something. If you're really passionate about it, just this passion goes into other people. And even though I may not be that much into same topics, now I want to learn everything about it. Like, I'm just so glad I managed to get to know her through our podcast. Like, wow.
Yeah, she's very infectious personality.
Yeah, it comes very natural to her. And like you said, it seems like she doesn't get tired of it. She can just keep going. It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you don't always like talk to the person that has a mission. Like, and you can really just see it. Like, the core values are like shining from her.
She couldn't stop that if she tried. Like I think trying to watch Anna do a job that was detached from, caring about humans or the environment or like our sort of long-term lifespan on this, crazy place is just like she wouldn't be able to tolerate more than I feel like a few minutes of somebody being greedy or like capitalist,
I call it, yeah, I have a name for it. I call it being allergic to bullshit.
Yeah, she does seem very allergic to bullshit. But she never makes anybody like. I think sometimes you can see that she does not like the type of work that's in front of her, and she still is actually quite deliberate and slow about just being like, yeah, for me that really doesn't align. But I've never seen her put anyone down, right? She's just very, very pure about like what drives her. And then it's sort of hard not to get on the same page when you're listening to her talk about it.
Yeah, that's a talent. That's
Yeah.
definitely a talent. One more thing I wanted to say, like before we get to the podcast episode, because we just released basically last week. This is our like second official episode that we're recording right now. And I was surprised how much positive feedback we got.
Yeah.
And a lot of my colleagues from like design studio, a lot of them are men. They were so supportive and I just couldn't believe how much they want to help me. And I have the thought that maybe like part of the problem why we are not so successful or sometimes too shy is that we don't have trust in men that they will support us. Sometimes we were like, like once bitten, twice shy. Someone was harsh for us, and then we think everyone else would be putting us down. And I wish I had more of this belief into people around me that they will be on the same page. And it's just great.
Yeah. Big thank you to everybody for the outpouring of support. I totally agree. Hey everyone, welcome to the DeAndre podcast. We're the members of the Seattle Women in Design group. And today we're joined by Anna Mengote Baluca. Anna, will you tell us a little bit about who you are, the type of design work you're doing right now, and your path to get here?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Anna. I'm an industrial designer based in New York City. Currently, I teach sophomores in the ID department at Pratt. I'm one of the leaders of the DEI Council of IDSA, and I just freelance here and there and also like looking for new opportunities.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I noticed when I was looking through some of your work that, equity, humanity, decolonization are really, really important to you. And I know that they drive a lot of the reason that you take on different projects in your consulting and things like that. How did those core missions become so important to you?
I think for me, I got into design really with the mission in mind, if that makes any sense. Like my route here had always been long-winded, but if I could think of like a moment in my younger years, it's always that I wanted to go back home in the Philippines and I wanted to make some kind of impact. And I thought that design would be the way to do that. And so after working professionally in Seattle for a little bit, I think I just got kind of burned out and committed to only working on things that I would feel fulfilled around 2016. And that probably also has a lot to do with all of the social revolutions happening in the US.
Totally.
And at the time in the Philippines, we were having a lot of horrible natural disasters, like a lot of super typhoons and a lot of like displacement and earthquakes and all that things. So it felt like working on jewelry or housewares seemed so little and not impactful in the kind of scale that I want to do. And I think that that's really my turning point. Yeah.
I actually, if I could back up a little, I want to understand how you even came across industrial design. Was that something that you learned about in the Philippines? How did it first?
No. So I was in a path for architecture. I interned at an architecture firm in Seattle when I was in high school. I don't know if they even remember me, but like I think that they're kind of becoming like big now. Baya Suzuki Architecture was like their first intern, or at least high school intern, maybe the only ever. And I worked with like their like organized their materials library. But at that time they gave me a mentor. And she said that everyone needs a master's degree now to be an architect. And so she had suggested that I pursue whatever I want during my bachelor's years and then just go on to get like a master's degree in architecture afterwards. And so for undergrad, I got the opportunity to study in London, and I thought it was just like the coolest opportunity. And I pursued graphic design then, but it wasn't really fulfilling me. I think that my mind had just always been like 3D, and like it was an international school. Tuition was insane. There was no financial aid, and then the recession hit, and I felt really horrible asking my parents to pay pounds in tuition, one of them coming from Filipino pesos and the other one from US dollars. So I went back home to wanting to go to UW, but then UW wasn't taking in any transfer students at the time because of the recession. And so I ended up at the Art Institute, and I was kind of like, I'm just gonna finish any degree, and and because I was like, because I'm gonna get a master's anyway, so I'll just finish any degree. So I ended up in graphic design again, and in my graphic design class, one of like my now like really like best friends, he also takes credit for this actually. We were in like our basics for 2D design class, and he talked about his major, which was industrial design. And he was like, we have the laser cutter here, and like, have you gone to the ID lab? And he took me to the workshop, like with like the wood shop with the prototyping lab and everything. And I was just in love right away and changed my degree like right there at the same day. But
Wow. I really love that you like continually are seeking out like fulfilling work, that you keep making moves to change what you're doing to make it more like aligned with you. And we were wondering if there's times that even though you're like making your work fit your self your personality and your mind better? Are there times where the path you wanted to take was still like conflicting with your values, or that you had to make some sacrifices and compromises?
Yeah, always. Because I mean, I think that like like ID, like I'm always like, oh, anti-capitalism, etc. But or like sustainability. But at the end of the day, like when we make products, we just keep on making things that end up in a landfill. And actually like lately when I'm like looking for opportunities for jobs, I've really been trying to switch my career section towards strategy, just so that at least it would consider that kind of questions instead of just building products here and there. And I think that like in my younger years there was a lot of compromise, like like Kate knows this, like I make jewelry and I liked it because to me it was like, oh, it's a way for me to practice my precision work, um and model making, and at that time it was like to help fund my college degree. But eventually it's just like jewelry is a luxury item and it really doesn't impact anything. Like and I don't even know how it, like besides that it's all like essentially, especially like fine jewelry, which I don't really work with. Like I only work with like say like sterling silver, so it's never like gold plated or anything like that. And so like that's like a niche market that is not quite accessible to everybody else. And so that adds another level of like, and it's also belongs in fashion, which is also another like very not sustainable thing. Yeah, but I think that I gave myself a couple of years where this was okay. And even until now, like I still enjoy doing that. But as far as like professionally, I've really tried to stay away from that part of my identity. I think around maybe 2013, 2016, I had a small studio with my partner back then. And we were essentially hanging out with a lot of the pretty popular like designers in Seattle now, like they're like good colleagues of ours. But at that time I was becoming known as like Anna the jeweler, and I really hated that. And it was just like I don't want to be that. Like, like I even like I was working at a startup and we were doing wearable technology, and I got hired because of my like jewelry background. But like because everything was under development and most of the work that people see out of me is like jewelry and housewares and stuff like that, it was always just like she's this kind of designer. And I really wanted to be more. Not saying that that's not a respectable like specialty at all, but like yeah, like as far as like alignment to what I want to solve, it wasn't fulfilling me in that way.
This actually sounds like a huge sacrifice because you have this love for ID, for making 3D objects, getting materials in your hand, producing more, but you are actually very aware that like we have enough stuff in the landfill and maybe we don't need more. So to kind of control it, you chose the path to go more into strategy and be like the first loop in the chain of the process to be able to influence people who would be taking over the job that you loved so much, to make sure someone else would be doing the right choices, but like took away from yourself this phase. How do you feel about it? Like, I really admire it. I don't know if I would have courage to do that. Even though I have like similar thoughts very often that like enough plastic is being produced in China daily.
Yeah, I mean like I don't know how I do it honestly. Like I think that because I really do love building things, and I love being part of that process. But I think that when I think about it, like kind of big picture, the concept development part of the design process is just so much more attractive to me. I think that that's where a lot of the innovation lies, right? And like the model making and prototyping, you can really have someone else in your team who's so much better in model making than I am, or in prototyping than I am. Like when I was in school, I don't know if my past professors would agree, but I would say that my strengths were definitely concept development. And as much as I love the wood shop and the prototyping lab, not a lot of the tools fit my hand. So I always had to ask my guy friends, like sandblasting something, like I have to be on a stool and the gloves is just like 3 times the size of my hand. So I can never actually functionally do it. That I always have the same friend who got me into ID to just be like, hey, want to sandblast this for me? And it's just kind of frustrating, to be honest. So it's like, I'll give up this part of the process as long as I can have some kind of power in the actual concept part of it.
So we are really interested in your take that the design industry has an influx of trendy or non-human centered aspects that do not preserve the integrity of the design. And you wrote a super interesting article about Robinhood app and how gamification maybe not always is the right choice, how it works great for the educational app might not be the best practice in apps that help you manage your financials. And we also wonder, what do you think is driving this, and what decisions designers should be making, and what really means this human-centered design, how to preserve your integrity, choosing the projects or working on the projects that might not be so ethical when you look at them from the different angle.
Right. This is going to be I think that this is essentially designing human experiences is kind of like a project that stemmed out of my frustrations on how design is shifting to be user centered and user very UX focused, right? And I understand that in the part that we're creating digital products and all of this, but a part of me feels that it's becoming a little bit overblown. A part of me thinks that this design concepts tend to have been distilled into these dogma that you should just follow. Like in the Robin Hood article, for example, it's new UX designers or maybe even developers, like front end developers, is also always design for mobile first, design for this, like a list of things, without really thinking of the depth of how that might affect it in kind of a cultural way. So DHE shorthand is really stemmed out of a conversation between me and a good friend. She was a Fulbright scholar at Pratt studying digital information technologies for museums at that time. And essentially we were talking about experience, not in just experiencing a screen, but experience could also be in an in that in our first conversation was in the context of experiencing a museum, thinking it's not necessarily just architecture or product design or exhibit trade finding, but when people enter the museum, even just a lot of aspects, everyone experiences it differently. And I don't know if we have done enough to actually make it so that everyone should experience it in a more similar way. The storytelling of museums comes from a very colonizer perspective, and so it's just oh, look at this beautiful landscape art, without actually saying that landscape art historically was used as a propaganda way so that the colonizers would go west because there's all of these free space, and not a lot of people know that. And museums end up having this power of educating masses and just not really in a very superficial way, and that's all kind of, I think I'm rambling, but I feel like we do that in everything that we design, because we always think about the end user and we always think about essentially how to make a business out of it. And my fight against capitalism in a way is to try to deconstruct that, while realizing that it's okay to make money or it's okay to have a business, but there is a very fine boundary of a way of exploitation, right? And analyzing Robinhood in that sense is there is a way to make banking and trading be more accessible to the mass retail investors. And I think that one way of doing that is actually asking them what their intention is of using this app. Is it to flip stocks? And if it is to flip stocks, are you giving enough information and education for them to do that responsibly? Or are you just really basing all of your design choices to essentially get them addicted to just do that?
It's very interesting how you mentioned museum experiences. And there's something that came to my mind. Like Netherlands is a country which is very like design aware, like users aware. And Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam is actually like made huge impression on me because like Dutch were big colonizers and they have like whole floor with art which, as you described, was kind of propaganda art trying to justify the colonization, showing like sketches, like line drawings from when there was the slaves uprising, and they kind of don't hide it. They took it as a part of their cultural heritage and they showed, hey, we did it, like it shouldn't have happened. This is still very interesting in a way period of their like painting and art, and they put it out there, and it makes much bigger like social impact on you and impression than just going through the nicely curated landscape pictures.
Yeah.
Although they also like refer to that age as the golden age a lot, right? And like they still own all of that art. So
Yes.
Yeah.
It's never straight.
Yeah, like,
but anyway,
like it's hard, right? Because there's the argument of like, oh, this is cultural preservation, like going to the Met and they have like a bunch of stuff from like the Middle East, or what is a politically right term of like the Middle East right now? Like I think like was that Swana, Southwest Asia / North Africa, and the argument is that like if they didn't take it, then maybe the war would have destroyed this whole thing and then it would just not be here in the first place. And but it's like, is that for us to decide? Are we the colonizer? Should we be the one deciding whether or not this should be preserved? And if it is being preserved but outside of their culture, is that still preservation? I don't know.
Yeah, like it's paternalism, right?
Yeah.
yeah, that's such a good word for that, actually. Like we just think we're the best at making decisions for everybody else and holding on to their valuables because they like can't be trusted. I mean, that's absolutely backwards.
Land back, give the art back.
Yeah. I see some museums. I think I forgot what museum I was in Boston that had some empty spaces, and then there's a note that said that they had returned this artifact like somewhere else. So I think that's a good step. But in general, I'm not like museums that hold on to artifacts. I'm not sure how sustainable that practice is. It's especially if everyone, like if the rest of the world wants to get their artifacts back, like eventually it's going to be lost, right?
Mm.
Art museums, maybe they have a place. Like I don't know what the difference is with like galleries necessarily. Like, but yeah, I don't know if that was too much digression from the.
No, it's super interesting. Super interesting. I mean, to focus on design specifically again a little bit, though, I do think that designers tend to wash our hands of this work a bit. You know, like I think that maybe we pick a company that we think is morally decent, and then we sort of say that we're doing the best within our ability, but that people that are like more on the business side or the marketing side are really the ones that are like driving the ship towards making good or bad decisions, right? Responsible decisions. Like in the case
Right.
of fintech, you know, it would be easy for a designer to sort of be like, well, I met my brief, like this was my directive, and I didn't make the decision about what we were trying to do. How can designers sort of be better advocates for making ethically responsible decisions and take
Right.
more responsibility, right? Like not just sort of push the blame off onto the greedier professions because we're the ones doing
Yeah.
it.
Honestly, like your work of employment has a lot to do with like your impact, right? And
Mm-hmm.
what I'm learning from like one of my other badass friends, she's a freelance UX designer, and she just asked like the right questions during interviews.
Mm.
Like how would you deal if a designer doesn't feel like the design, like if the values of the designer doesn't align with what the direction of the design that you're trying to push is, what would be the steps for your team to address that? Like, what would happen to that designer? Like, asking those really tough questions in the interviews.
It's an
I
awesome
never
question.
even thought of doing that like until I met her, and just like all of like the questions that she asked, because there's so much crap out there, like, and so much like a lot of like hiring managers just kind of want to entice you during that process, and then you're working for them and you're kind of stuck, and then you come up and like, oh, this doesn't align with my value, oh, this is becoming a hostile work environment, and you're so far off from like the initial conversation when they're trying to sell the company to you, you know? So like, I wouldn't completely blame designers in that, because I think that we all go through that process, and we all just kind of want to believe in the best of like that conversation when you're trying to start a project or a product. But I would definitely advise that from the very beginning, like, ask those tough ethical questions on like, what happens if there's a misalignment, and just see if like their answer is good enough that you could like, oh, this is a person that would be amenable, or like that I could actually have tough conversations with, and maybe their values at the end of the day still aligns with me and could be a good advocate for that.
Do you think that the values issues and the ethics issues are equally present when it comes to hardware and physical product design versus software? And do you think the strategies that you can employ when you're interviewing are the same to discover some of these potential problems?
Yeah, like, I think the ID it's a little bit tougher just because the development is a little bit more restricted, um, in a way that we still have to depend on supply chain, material availability, and all that sort of like labor standards and who we're practicing with. And I don't believe that a lot of companies are fully transparent or as transparent as they might think, or they would only advertise the good parts of their systems instead of the bad ones. So I wouldn't blame like the designers in that essence, but definitely like, I think that once, if value alignment is very important to you, and once you hear that there is something that you're not super happy about, I just hope that there is a place in the company or space to bring that up, you know, because that would suck. Like I would not be happy if suddenly like, oh my god, I mass manufactured like 20,000 of this thing, and I didn't know that this like that's like 20,000 hours of like child labor, you know? Yeah.
How do you teach this type of thinking to your students? Because you are a tutor at Pratt, and you put like a lot of intent into teaching the more equitable design. And like, how do you help younger designers develop these skills and have this type of critical thinking that like you apply from even choosing the job? And like, would you tell them to ask the questions that your friend is asking?
I have to say, my students are awesome. And in some ways, they're kind of like ahead of the curve, or think about these stuff more deeply than I have been thinking. So I have a little bit of faith, or like in the next generation of designers. I would disclose that the class that I teach is sketching and like 2D representation and presentation stuff. So not too much about like the critical thinking. They have a studio professor for that. They do come to me for like kind of some feedback, like how can they improve their projects, and if so, then I do bring it up. But when it comes down to like actually my class, for example, we're drawing body figures. I would just hint at saying things like, oh, you know, like, consider the diversity of the body figures that you're drawing. A lot of the times we draw physical, yeah, like body figures for context of sketches and stuff like that, and it's always like an able-bodied person and like a very median or average built, you know. So I do give them kind of like extra credit or something if they push the boundaries into thinking about that in a more diverse way. Yeah, like I think that my power in that sense is a little bit more limited. In presentation, it's just all about like accessibility visually, like that kind of thing. But as far as like actual concept development, most of the projects that they work on are very quick. It's like 2 to 3 week projects. And every time that they have presented some things, I'm always just surprised that they're definitely thinking about all of this in a much more advanced level than when I was thinking about it when I was 19.
I'm not surprised though that they come to you to kind of dig into that way of thinking more, because even if you're giving them little cues in the feedback about the drawings and stuff, I think it sort of is indicating to them that you're the type of person that they could like think harder about being more equitable
Yeah.
with, right? And like turn to you when they need to know more about how to do it.
Yeah, and I think that they can probably see that in your work too, like
Right.
that while you weren't thinking about it when you were 19, you're clearly thinking about it now. And I was looking into the work that you did for the Association of Filipino American Scientists, and it was kind of fascinating that the issues facing that organization were like sort of similar to some of the things we're trying to tackle here about imposter syndrome, cultural identity and diversity, recognition, and that that's occurring in the sciences. And so we wanted to know more about like how you decided to get into this and how you helped make it successful.
Yeah. So this I actually just got dinner with her, the founder of AFSA essentially. She and I went to Columbia together. She's like currently pursuing her PhD in cancer biology. She's another badass. Highly suggest you surround yourself with like these types of like badass friends that just constantly inspire you, you know?
That's what we're
Um,
doing here. Exactly.
yes. So Carla, her name, she founded it because she just, she's an international student experiencing all of this like culture shock and stuff. And being someone that comes from the Philippines to study here is a very different experience than someone who grew up in the US, Filipino, and studying here. There's still like some culture shock. So essentially, she just wanted to bring her own community. She invited me to be a part of it, like from the very beginning, but I don't feel like I'm a scientist. Most of the people that she had invited at first were like PhD students and research in all of those like really hard sciences. But we really came together during COVID, because I was pretty lost. I was trying to start my own agency, and I intentionally wanted to go back and forth between the Philippines and the US, and that just wasn't possible. And little known fact actually is that me and Carla, so like the founder of AFSA, along with some colleagues in the Philippines, um, we helped establish the sixth COVID testing center in the country. And it was just a bunch of like, it was just like a group chat of people with like access or connections. And we just kind of like mobilized this one island and then hooked them up with all of our connections and how to get like PCR machines, etc. It took a long time. And we were really more there, like Carla and I, more on like a consulting basis, because at that time she really wanted to go home and help. And I also wanted to go home and help. So I introduced her within this group, and essentially that just started kind of the partnership. And I helped or volunteered at AFSA because she was like a one woman team trying to essentially force people to go on Zoom meetings and group chats so that she can build her community. And then I was just like, I'm just gonna help you. And I started doing mainly like their event posters, graphic design, and all of that stuff. And now it's like only been 2 years, and like the Slack channel has grown to like over 300 members. We've
Amazing.
had a consistent, like super amazing, like partnerships with people like in the Philippines, like interviewed scientists we didn't know existed there. And like a lot of the like the early founding members. Eventually there became kind of like a group of 6 of us that really formalize it as an organization, turn it into like a nonprofit, got sponsorships, and like set up like a leadership board. And so now they're pretty sustainable. Like I'm not really an active part of it anymore, but like I've already handed off like all the templates for the new publicity committee, and then they just like kind of follow it to create like presentations and event posters and all that jazz.
Nice.
And you've done a project with them, right? The chair that you have on your portfolio that you developed with the Filipino textiles.
Oh, that one is yeah. That one is just like that one is just a personal project. It was it's one of the things that I wanted to pursue too. Like one of the reasons why I wanted to go back and forth in the Philippines is I was trying to build like a furniture or housewares line that really honors my culture. So that chair was like one of the finalists for the ASEAN something Southeast Asian nations. Like
We
it's
can
like
look it up.
yeah, like they had like a furniture, like an annual furniture exhibit trade thing, and so like that chair was one of the 3 finalists coming from the Philippines. But that recognition happened in 2018, which was right when I decided I was gonna go take this like advanced certificate in New York. And so I moved, and after that I was like, oh, I'm ready, like let's start like a manufacturing place back in the Philippines. And I was there in December of 2019, doing like workshops, starting my facilitation thing. And I was scheduled to come back January, like after 4 weeks. I thought I lost my passport, so I canceled my trip back. I found my passport, but by the time I found my passport, it was like COVID, like ban, like, and so needed to pivot essentially after that.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention it's like one of my favorite design that I've seen from you. Reminds me very much the work that the American company St. Frank Textiles is doing, like basically St. Frank, how they design elements working with like the world, and how like people from like Mexico, Guatemala, the original, and who know the like culturally driven, how it's all being combined into this beautiful collection of very like luxurious boho items that you can get in the US, and it creates the business opportunities in the less developed countries, and also like really appreciates this genuine art. The only problem I have with it is that we basically take these beautiful items just to sell them as the really expensive luxury in the States.
Yes.
So it has like pluses and minuses, but it's a feasible business.
Yeah. No, that's exactly my problem with it too, actually, because so there's an island in the Philippines that's becoming the furniture capital of Asia as far as manufacturing is concerned. So Patricia Urquiola, Calvin Klein, like Deden, they're based in Europe. I think the Netherlands actually. Oh, so I don't even know if I'm saying that right. So all of those, like a lot of them are manufactured in the Philippines. And then there's like these like kind of Filipino superstar furniture makers that are like popping up everywhere. One of them has this beautiful chair, and he's kind of like a local celebrity when it comes to furniture design over there. But his chair is like $20,000 a piece. And it's just like, who would buy that? It's like, I think he ships everywhere in like the Middle East, and then like maybe hotels in the Philippines in like the top 1%. But I am just a little bit annoyed that like the person that we attach Filipino design to is essentially someone that is not accessible to like 99.9% of the country,
Yeah.
So yeah.
So the chair that you make, did you feel like the materials and stuff that you chose actually could have been a little bit more like integrated into mainstream Filipino life?
I really wanted I really wanted to, like, as far as the intention is concerned, and maybe price point, I was really thinking of like how do you charge someone in the Philippines versus someone in the US,
Mm-hmm.
which essentially I think a lot of times it's like if it's exported out of the Philippines, it at least doubles the price just because of all of like the taxes involved and the shipping and things like that. But one of the like islands where my mom is from is like the capital of this woven mat technique, and that was like the huge inspiration of like the actual weaving in the chair. And I really was trying to follow like models where the brand Cotopaxi, I think they're based.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like they have some backpacks where it's just like a random one, right? Where they just kind of like, I think the whoever the manufacturers are, they get to pick or choose the colors that they put together.
Mm.
So I really wanted to implement that in this chair, is that like the patterns is like totally up to the manufacturer, so that at least like their hand and their actual art will be a little bit more obvious than something that is just 100% like manufactured and the same every time.
Cool. Like the customization, but not on the consumer request, but like the art maker request.
Yeah, like really like kind of have like creative freedom, like I think we all seek that to some extent, like be able to express your own wills. So the pattern on that chair is totally not traditional Filipino, just so you know. It's really more of just like, oh, is this gonna make sense?
That's your creative freedom, right? I mean, you get
Yeah,
to
that
have
was
your own stamp on it. Yeah, that's really cool.
Also interesting to think about like nowadays very spoiled consumers who tell you exactly what they want. How would like the design feel if like there were some customers that would accept that like pay like higher price for like a custom make object, but I don't send a spec that it needs to like fit my red rag or my painting on the wall. It's just like I really appreciate this culture and like this type of art. I look at it more of like a functional art rather than like from IKEA catalog.
Mm.
Just trust the artist and have something very genuine that isn't just manufactured, like hand manufactured due to the spec.
yeah.
I wish there were people like that. Like, good luck with the chair. I hope like you will be able to get back to the project, as now we're like able to travel more and everything goes very slowly back to normal.
Yes. Like a part of me now though is like didn't consider kind of like the sustainability part of flying
Mm.
10,000 miles like at least twice every year. So I think I'll keep that on hold. I have been taught like I've talked to some friends in Seattle that kind of has like their own shop and manufacturers like furniture. So I'm toying with the idea of like letting him build the frame itself,
Cool.
but I don't know how to figure out like the weaving part of it, because that one takes forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, culture is really important to me, or at least like preservation and definition of it, and not just in a like very exoticized way. I don't know if that's the right term, but like I think that like we always think when we think of a specific culture, we think of like some kind of like item or object on like what that culture might look like. But I don't think that that's always true, and it's always sort of like the exotic version of it from like way long ago,
Right.
And so like what we do now, like in a contemporary way, is still important, and it's still part of like, if anything, it redefines the culture of it now. And so I wish that there are more artists or designers that creates artifacts in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Anna, I want you to run us through, honestly, the variety of degrees or disciplines that you have dabbled in, because it is wild, and I like need you to break it down. I can't possibly begin to summarize.
Yeah. From when?
Whenever you feel like it's part of this framework that built who you are.
Yeah.
That's your whole life, really, I guess. But the
Oh
ones
my
that you feel like
God.
are relevant.
Yeah. So I think architecture is relevant,
Mhm.
but like I kind of like lost love when I just did like ID. I do think that ID is still kind of like my original love, if anything.
Mhm.
So there was a component of graphic design to it. But like when I was a little bit lost and things like that, and I went home to the Philippines, the one thing that I tried to pursue is, or at least I was very interested in, is like solving problems in larger scale. And so I got my post back in urban studies. I wanted to be an urban planner, and I was essentially shopping to see if like Columbia was the place for that. Because I think if you want to study cities, New York City is the place to do it.
It's a good place, at least.
I still think that that's true. Yeah, yeah. I still think that that's true. The program at Columbia wasn't for me though. It's mainly law and policy, and
Oh, yeah.
there's a certain sort of like, I don't know how to describe it, but like there is a program that's like urban design, but you can't get into
Right.
it unless you have an architectural degree. And so I kind of hate architects for that in that sense. Because I mean, like ID, we have the same skills. It's like CAD, sketching, it's planning, it's design. It's just in a much smaller scale. Like I feel like we should be able to apply and get in and be successful in urban design schools.
Yeah, that's some gatekeeping right there.
Yeah,
Seems like
yeah,
really similar thinking. I mean, we like know so much of the same problem solving. That's so arbitrary.
yeah. And architects claim to be industrial designers, so I'm like, why can't it be the other way around?
They can-
I know why it can't be the other way around, but yeah. So I got into urban studies. I still like it, and like actually during the pandemic, I was taking classes in economic development, which is a field that I did not know exists. It's essentially economics for the poor. Yeah, and I thought that was super interesting. Um, I was keeping this on the down low, but now I'm pursuing social design.
Wow. Tell us more about that. Like, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so what it means to me is like a program in grad school.
All right, fair answer, fair answer. Oh my
But
gosh.
I think that like the essentially it's the I hope that it's like a type of design that actually asks like the questions that I'm asking, like something like on a scale of like a society issue. The program that I will be doing is at MICA, and they have like field studies, and it's practice based, where I think that at least my assumption is that you're partnered with nonprofits or government organizations, and then you tackle an issue and try to solve it in with a design mindset rather than like policy or economics or in whatever other solutions it might come to be. And if I could add, so the one, no, not the one thing, like I'm speaking at IDC about like a multi-user approach in design thinking, and I think that that's like something that Americans don't think of, but like the field of service design is essentially like probably the best vantage point when it comes to thinking of a systems approach in solving problems. And a lot of the positions for service design in the US is only for like nonprofits or like government organizations. So it's really not like capitalistic based. Although I would say that a lot of the reasons why some tech industries fall short on their equity in design is because they always only approach it in a single user approach. And if they were to implement some sort of like service design blueprinting from the very beginning, I think that they could address some pain points and equity issues early on.
That's really interesting. I think in general, you just painted a really like a really understandable picture of why you're dabbling in so many fields, right? You're marrying them, merging them, and sort of taking the best elements from each. But at your core, you are staying in design. You said ID is your original kind of core love. You're still in design if it's service design. Why do you think design is giving you like the most impactful skill set to come at these problems, even when you're integrating things like economics and, urban planning and things like that?
Yeah, it's probably the trying to put words in my thoughts. It's chaotic up in here, guys. I think that like this like solving problems with a designer mindset is not super limited. Whereas in say scientific mindset, it kind of is. Like the whole like thinking outside the box type of stuff, like I feel is very much in the designer's like mind, but not necessarily addressed in other fields that are also problem solvers.
Like maybe being a designer lets you actually hold 5 of those things simultaneously. Whereas if you were
Yeah.
in science, you would have to be more specific about which one you were using to tackle the problem at any given moment.
Yeah, and I think there's like less limits. I don't know if I'm saying this right. Like I can't think of a good example. But like maybe in healthcare. So for example, if a patient has a problem, they go to a cardiologist, they're always only going to look at the heart. They go to a surgeon and they're always going to want to cut. But I feel like designers are not so specific in that sense that they always only think of like, oh no, there is only this one product that could solve that. Like I think that we're a little bit more rebellious in the way that like I hope that we would think of all the potential possibilities before coming up with an actual solution, and that we're not just like intricately tunnel visioned into like a solution right away.
Well, you especially.
At least I hope that that's the kind of designers that we make,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it goes along with what you've been trying to get us to think about this whole time, which is like to be a less pigeonholed type of thinker in design anyway, right? Like you are good at that even more than lots of us other designers are. And we can all like implement that practice more, I would say.
This is a good definition of design thinking as well. It's basically just thinking about more than one angle and one solution. It doesn't even have to have that much to do with design. It's just looking at the broad spectrum of aspects that you face when you try to solve a problem.
Right. Right. So kind of like going back to, I have like some like lists in my head of like, oh, really big problems I want to solve in my lifetime. Probably not going to solve any of them, but if you just entertain me. So like one of them is like there's a river in Manila called the Pasig River, and it's like dirty, it's dead, it's just bad, like really bad. So one of my core goals is to clean it up. Probably going to be impossible, but like I think that when I was a kid, there was this one area in Manila that I don't remember why I was there, and it was called like the Smoky Mountain, and it's just like dump, like it's just an open landfill, and then they burn it, and so it creates this like mountain of garbage, and it's smoky because they burn it. So a lot of waste issues in the infrastructure in Manila, and a lot of the big things. I remember talking to one of my aunts, and she was mentioning that like a lot of the issue is because of like the squatters is what we call them, and essentially they're poor people who just build little shanties by the river and by like the smoky area mountain, and they're the cost of all of this because they just dump things on the river, etc. And this was like me when I was like maybe less than 10. Because yeah, this was me when I was less than 10. I don't know why I was thinking this at such a young age, but I wanted to be either in engineering or architecture because I was like, I'm going to build houses for those people so that they could be away from the river and from the Smoky Mountain. And that was like the intention of architecture. And then suddenly it's like, oh, let me do that in ID. And it's like, I can't think of a specific product, but even when I was a student, it was about like emergency disaster relief, like a 2 to 3 week project of like a pop-up housing something. So it was always related to housing. And then around 2016, when like the disasters in the Philippines was happening, even until now, like we get over 25 typhoons in a year, and at least 5 of them are super typhoons. And so there's an area that is kind of like the gateway of the typhoons. This also happens to be the island where my mom is from. So at one year, like I think there was like a record-breaking typhoon that made landfall in the Philippines. I want to say that was like 2012, 2013. And so like our farmland is just completely like gushed out. A lot of people lost their homes, and like like our coconut plantation is just wiped. And it takes like decades for coconuts to be able to be harvestable again. So essentially our farmers just don't have jobs. And so at that time, I kind of pivoted to at least solving the logistical issue of like, how do we support them through this time? How do you build houses for them, etc. And then it became more of like, instead of architecture and ID, let me do this in like an urban scale. And that was kind of like the urban studies version of it. And so I think that like all of these like random, me being like a forever learner or forever student, is really trying to tackle essentially the same problem of just like economical accessibility. And it's helping a lot in like seeing that there are other solutions instead of just like one specific thing. But it's also hard to translate professionally because I think a lot of people probably just think I'm crazy or like not very committed to one thing, you know what I mean? Like, because I think that there's a lot of value in like people like specialists, like they're so much more hireable than like multidisciplinary people, right?
I guess so. It's just that you're following the problem. Like, I guess I just can't imagine somebody that I respect more for like seeing a problem and taking like every single avenue towards like breaking it down, right? Like your motivation towards really specific goals is just elite, frankly, Like you don't lose track of that goal that you had when you were 10. That still matters to you.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy when you put it that way. Like I don't know why little me was even thinking about that, but yeah.
Because little you was awesome.
Yeah.
That's not childhood trauma. Is that what we're calling
Maybe.
it?
Maybe a mix. We don't know.
Yeah.
But it has shaped a very like caring person. I think that this is the real answer to the question we asked you first, right? Like, how did you develop these core values? Well, expose you to enough really important stuff and
trauma.
Yeah.
give you like an ambitious person, and you're gonna make it happen. And some trauma. You need to sprinkle
And
it in.
the trauma. Oh my goodness.
I think you already gave us answer to our last question that we want to ask all of our guests, because we want everyone to celebrate their like unique skills and like what they bring to the design and brag a little bit about themselves. But I think if I ask you, what unique do you bring to the profession and people you work with? I think we already like heard the answer throughout the conversation. Well, maybe there is something you wanna add, and if not, I can always ask you what's your favorite color.
I don't know how to answer my favorite colors. Like,
oh my god, it's Rose
all the shades of gray.
50 Shades of Grey. Okay, we take it as the girls from Seattle. Anything to add about your uniqueness as a designer?
I insist, Anna, brag about yourself. What makes you
Let's see.
unique as a designer? What do you bring to the table that nobody else is bringing?
I think definitely my problem solving skills, I want to say. Lately, especially, I've really been into like being a very special proponent for like economic accessibility. And I brought that in like a lot of the leadership conversations for the DEI Council of IDSA. I want to say that I had some impact in making some of our events a little bit more accessible, or like essentially giving more budget for some like DEI stuff. And essentially just looking at the topics of, oh my gosh, this is gonna be very long-winded again. I'm so sorry.
No, you're good.
So like my whole thing about like me being like anti-capitalist and exploitation of it, right? So I do think that designers should have some sort of like business or economics education background instead of just making. One really kind of thought-provoking conversations that I've had with my friends lately, we're talking about housing issues again, like development. And essentially, I was just kind of asking, like, is the housing issue an issue of lack of supply or demand, or is it an issue of like an allocation issue? And I think that my big beef about capitalism is that we keep on driving innovation so that the pie would get larger, but our pie is already large. Our problem is actually making sure that everyone gets a share of the pie. And no one is quite addressing that question. And so what I think that what I bring to the table as a designer or as a strategist is to always just be pushing that vantage point that it's not always about like creating more supply or creating more demand for a product, but rather like innovation could happen if we tackle this problem in a viewpoint of like, how can we allocate current resources and make it so that everyone has access to it.
I love this metaphor. I love it.
I love it too.
We have the big pie, but like it's not shared equally. Yeah.
That is the real big picture thinking.
Yeah. 1% of population keeps the biggest slice of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the friends that I was talking to about that was working for NYCDC. They're in affordable housing. But essentially, like from what I learned, is that the city of New York at least has two ways that they fund public housing. One of them is through the taxes that people pay, and that's like the publicly funded one. And the other one is through private investments. And those are like if you buy municipal bonds, etc. Right. And like we thought about this conversation because there was recently a historical building that is supposed to be landmark. And after the day that like before they were to make a decision, the developer literally just like demoed it. And he was just like so smug about it because it was just like, oh, 41 days is up. They haven't made a decision. So let's just like demolish it. And so they demolished this building. And then his argument is that it's going to be for affordable housing. And so I guess for me, it's like, that's a very like fine line, right? Like both are kind of equally important, I would say. But I do see the argument that housing is still way more important. Like people being housed is more important than a historical building just existing. But I was just bringing up the question that like, does New York City actually have a supply problem? Do we need another affordable housing building here? Or is there data that actually supports that we have empty spaces that are not being used and we have homeless population that like lives in the subway tracks or like wherever else? How do we bridge that gap? Because I don't think that it's building another kind of almost luxury affordable housing. And all of the innovation, or not all, but a significant amount of the innovation happening in housing is always like, let's build more affordable housing, but never like this actually placed people experiencing homelessness in houses that already exist that is currently empty.
Hopefully we can do all of it.
Yeah. Hopefully we can do all of it.
Start thinking about it hard and you're just sort of like, yeah, it's so true. It's where is the blockage, right? And like, I hope that designers can be part of uncovering it or like pointing it out. I'm definitely grateful for people like you asking those questions.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for all of this. I hope I get to see all of you next month.
Yeah, at
Yes,
IDC.
that's the plan.
That would be awesome. We'll be here. We're excited that it's in Seattle because everybody's going to come to our neighborhood.
Yes.
Anna, thank you so much for coming and being on the podcast today. I didn't know your favorite color was gray, and
It
I
changes
just
every
feel
day.
enriched by this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun. I can't wait to hear it.
Absolutely.
Maybe Anna could tell where to find her. Is it okay to reach out on LinkedIn to her? What to do if someone wants to learn more about any of the organizations Anna mentioned?
Great call.
Yeah, I'm all about LinkedIn. So definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn. I think I'm at MMENGOTE on LinkedIn. Any sort of like professional stuff, definitely hit me up there. I use Instagram, but I want to give you fair warning that it could just be a spam of cute dogs from time to time. But I answer it, so you can also find me there at AMENGOTE. But otherwise, I'm always looking for good professional connections. I think some of my closest friends lately have all just been from online. So
very cool. Well, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if some people in our audience, really connect with the type of work that you're doing and are really curious to learn more from you. So reach out to Anna. She's very friendly and very smart.
You can always reach out to us and we can always connect you with whoever we've been talking to if you're like too shy to hit her up on yourself.
yes.
Absolutely. And you can find us at WID Seattle on Instagram and LinkedIn. And you maybe already know that because you're listening to our podcast. I hope so. Awesome.
One day we will have a website and separate email.
Yeah. Well, we do actually have an email. We just need to use it. Good. Anyway, Anna, thank you so much. We're going to let you go.
Thank you. So much fun. Okay, have a good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Yeah, so we want to thank everyone again for listening. We really value your support, and we hope that you find these stories really valuable too. We're doing this podcast because we think there's so many voices that need to be celebrated and heard. And in doing so, that it'll be encouraging for other people that ever feel like they lose their way in design or don't have a place so that they can keep working and studying and researching and making great products that are going to help people in this world and make products, services, places more inclusive, more helpful, and ultimately make the world that we deserve to live in.
Everybody, thank you so much for listening again today. We are the Women in Design Seattle group. We would love it if you connect with us. You can find us on Instagram at WID Seattle, LinkedIn under the same name. And if you'd like to send us a direct email, we'd love to hear from you that way too. It's WIDSEA@idsa.org. Thanks.